Hello and welcome from Oraro and Company Advocates. I am Chacha Odera, the senior partner in the law firm. I also head the disputes team in the Employment and Labor Relations Practice Group. Today, we commence OCO Roundtable podcast series touching on emerging issues in the employment and labor relations space. There will be 4 series, and this is the first of the 4. With me today, I do have 4 of my teammates in the Employment and Dispute Practice Group. We have Anne Kadima, Sandra Kavagi, Meshack, Kwaka, and Jonathan Kisia.
Thank you, Chacha, and welcome again to our listeners. We will be engaging in a very robust discussion today on emerging trends in employment and labor relations. And we will be covering the issue of working from home and looking at also the issues that arise in data protection and privacy. To start off with this discussion, I would like us to discuss what is this concept of working from home.
The concept of working from home is not entirely alien to us. It's a concept which had begun way before it gained traction in the workspace in Kenya. Previously, it's a concept which was practiced by way of a choice between employer and employee. But on March 13th in the year 2020, Kenya did report its first case of COVID-19. And amongst the guidelines that was given by both the government of Kenya and the World Health Organization was a requirement that people do practice social distancing. One way that was identified as being suitable for purposes of practicing social distancing is by reducing the number of people within the workspace. And in reducing them, it was seen and deemed necessary that it would be most convenient to have as many people as possible working from a different location. And in this particular case, it was identified that the home environment would serve this objective.
Thank you, Chacha. I can see that the concept of working from home, though enhanced during the COVID-19 period, was not an alien concept in the workspace. There were times when people did indeed work from home after making arrangements with their employers. And there are also times that people use the term remote working. And we would like to now discuss, is there a difference between working from home and remote working?
Well, yes, indeed, there is a difference between working from home and remote working, where with regard to working from home, as the word states in itself, is working from the confines of your home. However, remote working entails working away from your ordinary workstation. Therefore, you could have traveled and you're working from that place, or you have a job which entails you being in one jurisdiction and another. Therefore, to answer you, yes, indeed, there is a difference between working from home and remote working, where working from home would be said to be a form of remote working.
Thank you, Jonathan, for that insight. I would like us to delve deeper into this discussion of working from home. And to start it off, I would like us to look into whether all jobs are suitable for working from home.
There are categories of work where employees cannot ordinarily work from home, in a work from home arrangement. And picking up from where Chacha had left in terms of the introduction on work from home, then we recall that during the COVID-19 pandemic, there were some services or these categories of work that was categorized as essential services. And you will recall that some of these people started with doctors who were designated as essential services, and they could move around the country while the rest of us were at home. And therefore, that's the kind of work that cannot be performed at home. There's also the security companies for security guards, the ones who would take care of the premises. That is not work that can be done at home. I also recall, for example, garbage collection companies and the garbage collectors. When people were locked up at home, the environment still needed to be kept clean. So these are some of the positions that work from home could not ordinarily apply to in the kind of work that they do. And we will have this as a separate discussion later. There were other arrangements that the employers had to make in terms of the persons who could not carry work from home.
I do hear you saying that although work from home is an arrangement that can be adopted between an employer and an employee, not all jobs are suitable for that arrangement, in that there's some jobs that require the employee to be in their designated workplace to enable them carry out their duties. And with that, I also see that in any work from home arrangement, there is need for collaboration between an employer and an employee. And with that comes responsibilities that need to be borne by the employer on the one hand and the employee on the other hand. I would like to open up the discussion for this responsibility, starting with the employer's responsibilities in this respect.
The work from home cast new responsibilities to employers, responsibilities which have not previously been contemplated. And indeed, in the absence of a legal framework, one had to borrow from the existing framework to identify what responsibilities were required on the part of the employer. The most obvious responsibility that fell upon the shoulders of an employer is firstly to provide equipment and space within which an employee will be able to carry out their functions working from home. Of course, that came with its own challenges, which I believe we will be discussing later. But just as a precursor to that discussion, I would just like to raise the issue that one of those responsibilities which created a conflict is the question of balancing between the employer's role of providing a safe working place in the home of the employee, looked at as against the control that the employee had within their residence.
Thank you, Chacha. And as you were discussing that, you spoke about a legal framework and what kind of framework needed to be put in place by employees. I think, Meshack, maybe you can take us through a discussion of this legal framework. Is there a legal framework that governs work from home arrangements?
Thank you, Anne. Currently, Kenya does not have any specific legislation that provides for remote working. The closest provision that comes to mind is Section 10 of the Employment Act, which allows the employer to define the place of work. So currently, employers are just making tailor-made arrangements with their employees regarding work from home. I strongly believe that there is a need to codify these policies in statute, as the concept for working from home is the future of work.
So it is important for employers to have policies in place that govern this relationship, seeing that there isn't a specific law in the country that codifies or puts into writing what needs to be done by an employer and an employee. We had already begun the discussion of what an employer's responsibilities are, and Chacha was really taking us through the different things that an employer needs to put into place to enable this arrangement to operate smoothly. Chacha, apart from the health considerations and the apparatus or equipment that an employer needs to equip an employee with to enable them work from home, are there other things an employer needs to do to facilitate this arrangement?
Yes, there are other things an employer may be called upon to provide, but that of course depends on the nature of work an employee is executing from home. One of the things as lawyers we do recognize is that even as employees are working from home, the employer working together with the employee are required to ensure safety, especially of the information in respect of which the employee has in their possession regarding clients. We as lawyers are enjoined by law to maintain confidentiality with respect to clients' matters. So one of the things that comes immediately to mind is an employee working from home, having in their residence other people who are not members of the firm. How does the employer, working together with the employee, address this issue of confidentiality? Of course, there's also the other issue that arises. In professional indemnity insurance cover, part of the things which is required of the employer by the insurer or the underwriter is that they ought to provide a space in which a risk contemplated under that professional indemnity cover does not attach. The challenge that the employer gets is where they are not in full control of the space that the employee occupies while working from home. How do they mitigate that exposure?
Yes, I've heard you speak about equipping the space, creating a safe workspace, and this space that we're talking about is an employee's home. It's someone's home. We've come across a case from Switzerland, which an employee was awarded by the court a portion of their rent in a work from home arrangement because it was argued that they were using their space at home to use as an office to carry out their functions. What is your opinion on this? And how is this supposed to be interpreted in the Kenyan scenario?
One must look at the decision from Switzerland and in other jurisdictions in terms of the context upon which that decision was given. If the work from home is a strategy an employer has adopted, probably to cut down on the expense of office rent, then by all means, an employee's request for the employer to pay certain amounts of money, a portion of their rent, would not be unreasonable. But if it is merely a work from home strategy which has been taken more so by an employee applying to the employer that by reason of what they are doing, they would like to take some time off and work from home for either efficiency or being able to work without interruption, then that would present a problem, calling upon an employer to meet part of the employee's rent. Indeed, one also must take into account that that employee's residence is not exclusively for the use of executing the employer's work.
I've heard you saying or expressing to our listeners the different responsibilities that an employer has in this work from home arrangement. I would like us to delve deeper into that, and especially the issue of health and safety of employees while working from home and the liability, if any, that may attach to an employer for injuries or health concerns that arise from a work from home situation. We were discussing a case in this respect with Sandra. I would like Sandra to maybe tell us more about this.
Thank you so much, Anne. Now, even as we discuss these cases, because there were cases coming up from jurisdiction which is not Kenya, there was a case from the US. So I would like to say that even as we discuss them, we can just think about them in the context of Kenya, whether those scenarios would apply or not in a work from home arrangement. But in the first case, the particular employee was working from their basement at home, and then they had taken a break and gone upstairs to try and get some coffee or a drink of water, and their telephone actually went off. I want to believe it was the work phone. So they knew that that was a work call that they were supposed to attend to. So when they were making their way from the top floor downstairs to the basement, the employee actually slipped and fell. And when the court had looked at that kind of scenario, they had found that since the employee was on duty and what they were rushing to go and do was actually in relation to their work, then the employer was liable to compensate them for the injury that they had suffered as a result of that fall. That is the first one. The second scenario is that this particular employee was working from home, number one, and then during her lunch break, she decided to walk her dog, probably to clear her mind. Then when she was on the way walking the dog, there was a manhole ahead of her. So what happened is that she tripped on the leash of her dog, and because of that tripping, her foot went into the manhole and she broke her leg. And when the court looked at those circumstances, then surrounding that case, some of the considerations were that the particular employee was not working at that particular time. She was on her lunch break. And then what she was doing, walking her dog, had nothing to do with the description or any kind of work that she would have done for the employer, and therefore compensation was not payable at that point.
Thank you, Sandra. And I would like to loop Chacha back into this discussion And taking or learning from the cases that we have just discussed, what would you say are the parameters that a court would look into while discussing a case where a claim by an employee has been made for an injury that occurred during a work-from-home situation?
One would have to look at, first of all, our legal framework, where it does exist, and also look at the various duties owed as between the employer and the employee. In the case of tripping within your residential block, one must look at it as between carrying out your role as an employee and also look at it as against the Occupier Liabilities Act. The Occupier Liability Act imposes a duty upon the owner of the premises to maintain certain safety standards and provide a safety space for those people who are walking in, walking out, or occupying those premises. So the mere fact that somebody may trip on the stairway and they are in the course of their employment, one cannot look at it in isolation of the duty owed by the owner of the premises to the occupants of the premises.
We've discussed at length the duties an employer has towards an employee in a work-from-home arrangement. Are there any duties or responsibilities also on the other side that an employee has during this work-from-home arrangement?
Yes, what comes to my mind immediately is something that Chacha had said from the beginning on discipline in the work-from-home arrangement. I think I also heard it from Jonathan. There is that very huge responsibility on an employee to work in a work-from-home arrangement or space in the same manner that they would work if they were in the designated place of business, so that it's that discipline that will drive the employee to work on the projects that they have and work within the times that they would have worked on, and in that, by extension, also to deliver, to handle their deliverables, which the employer will then expect them to carry out in their work-from-home space.
Yeah, thank you, Sandra. I think if I'm hearing you correct, you're saying the employee really has a duty to remain available and accountable to the employer to ensure that they do their roles as tasked and as they would have done them ordinarily. I think also what comes to my mind is there is a duty of care with regard to the machinery that we're given, the equipment to carry out our tasks. I think also, as earlier as Chacha explained, the nature of our work, especially as advocates, entails confidentiality. Given that we live in homes where not everybody is part of the firm, there is an element of confidentiality which we as employees ought to keep with regard to our employers and clients' details as we go about working from home.
Thank you, Jonathan. Anything else that comes to mind? I think, Meshack, you'd like to take the discussion further on that?
Yes, I believe also employees should be very accountable to their employers in terms of the tasks that they are doing and what they have done in the course of the day. This is important for analysis, monitoring, and evaluation by the employer to ensure that the employee is productive even as they work from home.
Just picking up on that, what therefore are some of the things that an employer can do to monitor productivity of an employee in a work-from-home situation?
There are a few methods that an employer can utilize to monitor and evaluate the productivity of an employee at home. One of them is the use of timesheets, which account for the time that an employee will spend working within their home. Also, you can deploy, monitoring software, which is installed in the employee's device to ensure that they collect working data and monitor operational efficiencies. This will, for example, entail using keystrokes on the keyboard, phone calls, and also taking screenshots of the employee as they work. The third method that an employer can use is the group management software. This operates just as the monitoring software, but has a centralized working application whereby employees can log in and work on the same document or have a shared working space. This therefore ensures the employer has visibility of what the employee is doing at all times.
I want us to delve deeper into this discussion on productivity and how to measure productivity of an employee in a work-from-home situation. We've discussed the employment of technology in this regard. What if an employee that doesn't necessarily work on a computer or work on a laptop all day? What if the tasks entail doing other things outside the use of their computer? Then how then would we be able to measure productivity?
The greatest tool that one has in terms of monitoring is what can be referred to as self-monitoring, not necessarily an oversight monitoring by an employer. Self-monitoring, by its own definition, really requires self-discipline. An employee should be able to be disciplined to the extent that they know what is required of them, and they should have the ability of carrying out what is required of them without necessarily having an oversight. Indeed, some of those tools that Meshack has mentioned, though efficient in terms of monitoring, it also brings in the question of privacy. It is very possible that in deploying those particular tools, there may be a question as to whether they do infringe on the privacy of an employee. The other thing which an employer must also be careful about is whether in deploying those tools, those technological tools, one can argue that you are violating their rights to dignity, and whether by carrying out the monitoring using those tools, an employee may also raise a legitimate concern of servitude, which is a right protected by the Constitution. So, at the end of it all, as much as we deploy all these tools and all these modes of monitoring, the bottom line is that we need discipline. How do we deal with those people who are not working off a device through which one can monitor? Those are the cadre of workers who probably one way of monitoring their work is agreeing on outputs and deliverables. And in applying or deploying that particular method, what comes out is that once a task is agreed upon and a time within which it ought to be delivered, then what happens is that an employee is at liberty to deliver that task quickly, and if they do so below the time which they're ordinarily expected to give to an employer on a daily basis, then beyond that an employer cannot expect anything more other than ensuring that those deliverables or those outputs are of a quality acceptable to the employer or to the client in respect of which they are being done.
I've heard you mentioning things about data protection, data privacy, which is a discussion we will be delving into a bit later into this discussion. But I want us to close this discussion by first discussing some of the challenges that are faced both by an employer and an employee in a work-from-home situation, and also if you can give any mitigating factors that could be able to be used to address these challenges.
The first challenge is socializing people as to what working from home is. Working from home is just change of location of executing your work from the ordinary office space to your residence. Flexi hours is something completely different from the concept of working from home. Working from home, there is a requirement that you work within the hours which you otherwise have worked in the office, so that there's a common denominator of attendance to work both from the people who are working from the office, you working from home, and your clients making whatever inquiries or asking for whatever meetings they may require from whichever location they are in. So first and foremost, we must be always alive to the fact that working from home is merely changing the location from which the work is executed. And it doesn't mean that you can execute that work from home at whatever hour you want to execute it. You must do so within the policy that the employer has put in place with respect to working from home.
Are there any other challenges that come to mind in a work from home scenario?
Yes, another challenge which comes to my mind is the resources that will go into setting up a workstation at home, whoever is bearing the burden to ensure that the work continues seamlessly from home. Using our profession as an example, where there's a lot of court work and a lot of meetings that take place, one would have to have maybe, let's say, a library in place, a good desk and comfortable chair to support themselves with a computer. And background noise issues also arise during those meetings. Some of us may live in farms where the animals in their ordinary course of activities may engage in some noise, or you live next to a stage where there's a lot of vehicular noise or an ambulance. Therefore, there would be a lot of resources required to go in to ensure that your workstation at home is as efficient as it is in the office.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. And I'll jump in at that point because I've picked something that is of interest, but it's on the flip side of what you're saying. So in terms of even the environment that the employee stays in, lives in, and whatever it is that surrounds them, what we've seen a lot in the world and even in Kenya is that because of this work from home arrangement, another challenge is that employees spoke about, and what came out a lot is that there was a lot of challenges with the mental health. With this challenge of mental health, and now we are 4 years down the line after the attack of the COVID-19 pandemic, employers have given employees opportunities to try and deal with the mental health. There's been, whether it's including it in the particular employee's medical cover or by offering psychologists on the panel and so on. So employers have also actually adjusted to this new challenge that came with working from home. And then I think the last thing which is connected with mental health is the work-life balance. So employees have also had a challenge striking a balance between when to work, then keep on working for a long time, and then now that would also not balance out with their family or social life.
Yes, just picking up from where Jonathan and Sandra left, a common challenge that employees face working from home is power outages during the work period. This tends to disrupt their workflow, forcing the employee to seek alternative workstations. This may pose the question that will the employee maintain the privacy and the confidentiality of the work they're doing? And I believe this is a greater challenge working from home.
Yes, there are some of the things which I've heard Sandra, Jonathan, and Meshack allude to. And just to speak from the position of an employer, where one talks about work-life balance. As I said quite early, work from home merely entails you keeping the hours you'd otherwise have kept in the office, but executing that work from home within the same hours. And if one has family, I can understand where children disrupt the work, but I can't understand how a spouse would disrupt work, because that spouse is supposed to appreciate that you'd otherwise not have been at home, but at the office space. So what I am driving at is that ultimately one must make the call, whether by working from home, there are certain things which may be peculiar to themselves and which may disrupt their ability to carry out work, or whether they are better off carrying out that work within the office space.
I think we just need to close off our discussion and discussing a bit of data privacy and protection before now we can be able to make our closing remarks.
Yes, I think it would be important to highlight a few issues that would arise from this work from home setting that have got to do with data privacy and general regulation of privacy. If I had Chacha and Meshack correct in implementing the monitoring and evaluation systems and also ensuring that there's a control aspect, two issues which arise really is, one, the employee's rights to privacy, and on this flip side, the employer's rights to be able to control actually what their employees are doing. So, the right to privacy is guaranteed in our Constitution in Article 31, and as a result, we did enact our Data Protection Act, which subsequently established the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner. So therefore, looking at it from the two aspects on the side of the employer and the control aspect. Yes, so I just wanted to highlight one case, which was Pauline Muhanda versus Safaricom PLC, which tying it to Sandra's case of the dog leash and the lady who fell into the manhole. Are you really engaging in activities which are in furtherance of your employment while working from home? In that case, they did quote a decision which was rendered in the United Kingdom Supreme Court, Re Morrison's, which established the close connection principle. Are you really engaging in activities that are closely connected to your ordinary role? In doing so, you can see that employers have the risk of being found vicariously liable for their employees' misgivings in the ordinary course of the duties. So, what burden, therefore, is on employees to cover and cushion themselves from this? The Pauline Muhanda decision gave very good practical steps which employers can take to ensure that they cover themselves from these potential risks, such as vicarious liability. And to sum it up short, it really is ensuring that there are policies and procedures regulating the activities at home. Because the Data Protection Act does not cover legal persons as data subjects. Therefore, the most they can do is just ensure they have taken steps to cover themselves and make their employees sensitized about what is required of them. Therefore, on one side, we see the need to ensure that there are policies which are put in place, and on the side of the employee, they need to ensure that they do adhere to these principles. Yes, so therefore, in summing up this issue of data privacy, there's an obligation on both sides of the employee and the employer, and the need to ensure that in doing all of this, Article 31 on the right to privacy is upheld and is at the heart of all of this work from home establishment.
Very interesting discussion there, Jonathan. And I would like us to pick up more on this issue of vicarious liability and when it does attach to an employer in the instance of a working from home situation.
Yes, a vicarious liability is where an employer would be held liable for the acts of an employee. But there is a test. What are the circumstances? One, you must be able to show that the employee, in carrying out the task or the action which forms part of the complaint, was doing so in the course of their employment. And indeed, that's when various cases or decisions have always said that the test is that the employee was not on a frolic of their own. So for an employer to be held liable, it's necessary ingredient to present before the court that the employee was acting in the course of their employer's business, even if they were not carrying it in the manner in which the employer had prescribed.
Thank you, Chacha. It's been a pleasure moderating this first episode in our Employment and Labor Relations podcast series. My name is Anne Kadima, a Senior Associate at Odera & Company Advocates, practicing in the Employment and Labor Relations Practice Group, which is part of our disputes resolution team. As we come to a close of today's engaging discussion on emerging trends in employment, and in particular one from home arrangements, data protection and privacy, I would like to say a big thank you to our listeners and to the panel before me, Chacha Odera, Sandra Kavagi, Meshack, Kwaka, and Jonathan Kisia. At Oraro & Company Advocates, we remain dedicated to providing comprehensive legal guidance and support to our clients to help them navigate through the complexities of employment and labor relations issues. Remember, the dialogue doesn't end here. We invite you to stay connected by subscribing to our podcast. Your feedback is also valuable to us. Please feel free to share your thoughts or questions through our social media channels. Finally, we hope you listen into our upcoming episodes. Until then, stay safe, stay curious, and chase the boundless horizons of knowledge.
Goodbye and thank you.